Hey everyone! Today we are looking into the tale and afterlife of Catherine of Valois, a French princess who married the King of England in 1420. After the king's passing, she remarried one Owen Tudor, even though this wasn't really allowed. So, was this unsanctioned marriage the reason why she was left unburied for hundreds of years, or was it the result of something else entirely? Join me to find out. Catherine of Valois was born on the 27th of October 1401 in the Hotel Saint-Paul on the outskirts of Paris. Her father was King Charles VI of France, and her mother was Isabeau of Bavaria. Catherine is known as Catherine of Valois, as the House of Valois was the name of the French royal family at the time. They were a new royal line, the direct line of the House of Capet, which had ruled France since the 10th century, had died out in 1328, at which time the House of Valois ascended. Catherine's father was the fourth of the Valois kings. He had descended to the throne in 1380, when he was still just a child of 11. However, as he grew older, he developed psychological issues which caused him to have psychotic episodes and other symptoms of mental illness. His reign would last for 42 years in all, plunging France into a prolonged period of political weakness. This was the background Catherine grew up against. Catherine's life would be shaped by a war that had been ongoing in Western Europe for over half a century by the time she was born in 1400, the 100 Years' War. This conflict had begun in 1337 and was based on the fact that the English crown had controlled extensive territory in northern and western France, going back to the 11th century. When the last Capetian monarch of France died in 1328, King Edward III of England actually had a better claim to the French throne than did the House of Valois that Catherine hailed from. Edward had been the grandson of King Philip IV, ruler of France between 1285 and 1314. In 1337, he belatedly decided to begin pressing his claim to the French throne, triggering a war that would last down to 1453, 117 years in total. The 100 Years' War went through different stages. England made huge gains against the French in the 1340s and 1350s, but lost them in the decades that followed. While Catherine was growing up, the French people faced many hardships owing to the war, but she still lived a life of luxury, being provided with fine clothes, toys, and religious texts. She was even sent to a convent to receive a quality education. Things got even worse for the French though when King Henry IV of England rejuvenated the English war effort. It reached its peak under his son and successor, Henry V, who came to the English throne at 26 years of age in 1413. 2.5 years later, on St. Crispin's Day in late 1415, Henry won a devastating victory over the French at the Battle of Agincourt, and was now in a strong enough position to try and impose English rule over France. Catherine was to be central to these plans. In the year and a half after Agincourt, two of Catherine's brothers, Louis and John, died. This left just Charles as a surviving male heir to their father. Henry V now pressed home the military advantage he had gained at Agincourt, and peace talks began. A marriage between Henry and Catherine had been discussed in years prior, and Henry renewed this proposal. Catherine was said to be very attractive, and the English king hoped that a son of their marriage would one day succeed as King of England and France. The French, meanwhile, were in little position to resist his request. Thus, in May 1420 the Treaty of Troyes was agreed between England and France, and on the 2nd of June 1420, Catherine married Henry at Troyes Cathedral. The agreement stipulated that the first son of Catherine and Henry's marriage would succeed Catherine's father as King of France, and Catherine's sole surviving brother Charles would be passed over in the line of succession. Catherine now headed to England with her new husband. She was formally crowned as Queen Consort of England on the 23rd of February, 1421. Then, almost exactly 9 months later, she gave birth to the son that her husband hoped would unite England and France under one crown. They named him Henry, after his father. He was their only child, and he became King of England in less than a year. By the time the infant Henry was born, his father was back at war with the French. While campaigning in France, he died on the 31st of August 1422 at just 35 years of age, most likely from dysentery. Still short of her 21st birthday, Catherine was a widow. Moreover, English custom held that a Queen Dowager, the widow of a deceased king, should never marry again. This was to prevent legal claims to the throne arising from within the family of her second husband. As Queen Dowager to her son who became King Henry VI of England before his first birthday, Catherine might be expected to now play a major role in what would be a very long regency government. This would last until Henry was 14 years old, at which age he would begin to rule to some extent himself. However, Catherine's position was complicated. As a French princess, many of the English nobles distrusted her, and she was quickly sidelined by her brother-in-law Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, Henry V's brother. Humphrey was appointed Lord Protector of England during his nephew's minority. Catherine's position was further weakened after her father, old King Charles VI of France, died in October 1422, just weeks after the passing of Henry V. Although the Treaty of Troyes of 1420 had provided for Catherine's son with Henry to succeed to the French throne, Charles's sole surviving son Charles claimed the throne once his father passed. Over the next decade, in alliance with the famous Joan of Arc, he would win a series of victories over the English and affirmed his rule over France as King Charles VII. Thus, Catherine's marriage to Henry and the production of a male heir would not unite the crowns of England and France, and the French would eventually go on to win the 100 Years' War by 1453, in large part because Henry VI, Catherine's son, turned out to be as psychologically unstable as her own father had been. In 1428, Catherine aroused an enormous controversy. Although there was no law prohibiting it, it was considered customary for a Queen Dowager to never remarry after her husband died. Catherine broke with tradition 6 years after the death of Henry V, when she married a Welsh noble by the name of Owen Tudor. This occurred despite threats from the English Parliament that they would strip Tudor of his lands and wealth if he went ahead with the marriage. Catherine married Owen anyway, leading to disputes with her brother-in-law and many senior English nobles. Yet, Henry VI was just a boy of 6 at the time, and furious as they might be, Catherine was still the king's mother. As a result, Owen Tudor was protected against efforts to take his lands from him. Catherine and Owen's marriage resulted in a flurry of children in the first half of the 1430s. They had at least 4, 3 boys and a daughter, while there may have been another child or two, though it's hard to be sure, as Owen seems to have had an illegitimate child out of wedlock at this time as well. 2 of the sons, Edmund and Jasper, are extremely significant. Edmund was the father of Henry Tudor, who in 1485 would claim the English throne and become King Henry VII, founding the Tudor dynasty, while Jasper was a great advocate of his nephew's cause in the early 1480s. So, Catherine was the grandmother of Henry VII and great-grandmother to the infamous King Henry VIII. Catherine died before her son from her marriage to Henry ever really began to rule in his own stead, and before any of her other children grew up. She seems to have had an underlying illness for several years, and one of her pregnancies compounded the situation, leading to her death on the 3rd of January 1437, at 35 years of age. Catherine's passing initiated a bizarre 440 long-year saga surrounding her remains. The English nobles immediately moved to prosecute Owen Tudor for having married the Queen Dowager and placed him under detention. They also decided that it was unbecoming that a woman who had dishonoured her royal husband in the manner which Catherine had should be laid to rest alongside him. So, Catherine's remains were interred at the Lady Chapel at Westminster in 1437, and not alongside her husband's in the royal crypt at Westminster Abbey. Strangely, a wooden effigy of Catherine was instead carved and placed alongside Henry V in Westminster Abbey. Things would take an even stranger turn half a century later. Catherine's remains were left undisturbed in the Lady Chapel for several decades. Things only changed when her grandson, via her second marriage to Owen Tudor, rose to the English throne as King Henry VII in 1485. Much of Henry's reign was concerned with creating the idea that the House of Lancaster, York and Tudor were reconciled with one another under his reign, following the Wars of the Roses, which had occurred across England in the decades following Catherine's death, in large part owing to a crisis caused by Catherine's son. Well, in the 1450s, Henry VI had a psychological collapse. As part of these efforts, Henry VII developed plans to knock down Lady Chapel, where his grandmother's remains were, and to have a new grander chapel built to house the remains of several recent monarchs, including Henry VI. This necessarily involved disturbing Catherine's tomb, which was opened during the construction work. Henry never got around to finishing his project at the Lady Chapel. Instead, Catherine's coffin and her remains were simply removed to the grounds of Westminster Abbey, where Henry V had been interred. Visitors there in the early 16th century would have seen a battered coffin simply lying around on the ground. Surprisingly, nobody thought to remove it or inter it in some proper way. Instead, the coffin was simply left there. The only thing was that it was left there for approximately 280 years. Over time, Catherine's coffin became a subject of some interest. Part of it had broken off, revealing the remains within, and some people came to look at it, but it does not appear to have occurred to anyone in a position to do something about it, that they should remedy the situation. The sense of a macabre tourist attraction is furthered when we consider that Samuel Pepys, the Royal Navy administrator who kept a famous diary throughout the 1660s, visited the tomb himself and wrote the following about Catherine's remains. On Shrove Tuesday 1669, I to the Abbey went, and by favour did see the body of Queen Catherine of Valois, and had the upper part of the body in my hands. And I did kiss her mouth, reflecting upon it, I did kiss a queen, and this my birthday I 36 years old, and I did kiss a queen. By the 18th century, Catherine's remains had been left lying around in Westminster Abbey in an open, damaged coffin for so long that some local schoolboys had even disrupted them. Finally, in 1778, the Dean of Westminster, John Thomas, ordered the removal of Catherine's coffin and body, or what little remained of them, to the vault of the Percy family, one of England's oldest and most esteemed aristocratic lines. At this stage, they had been lying open in Westminster Abbey for nearly 300 years. The journey was not over quite yet. A century later, during the reign of Queen Victoria, a decision was taken that Catherine should finally be interred where she should have been placed 440 years earlier, alongside her late husband the King. In 1877, her remains, a few bones and some other bits of ashes and dust, were taken from the Percy vault and placed under the stone slab in King Henry V's vault. Thus, 440 years after her death, and nearly 400 years after her grandson had her tomb in the Lady Chapel opened, Catherine was finally laid to rest. The wooden effigy that had been placed next to Henry V in 1437 is now displayed in the gallery of Westminster Abbey. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on Catherine of Valois. I hope you found it interesting, Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments, and if you have any suggestions, also be sure to leave them in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.